In 2025, Social Security recipients will see a 2.5% increase in their monthly benefits. On the surface, that might seem like a decent raise, but is it really enough to keep up with the rising cost of living? In this video, we're going to dive deep into the details of this 2.5% COLA adjustment, explain why it's far less than it appears, and reveal why this adjustment is misleading for millions of Americans who rely on Social Security. By the end of this video, you'll have a clear understanding of why these increases aren't matching up with inflation and what needs to change for Social Security to better serve its beneficiaries. Welcome to Financial Area, your go-to channel for breaking down personal finance and government policies. If you're looking for insights and updates on topics like Social Security, be sure to hit that subscribe button and give us a like. Let's get started. In 2025, Social Security beneficiaries will see a 2.5% increase in their monthly benefits. This means that, on average, individuals who rely on Social Security will receive an additional $50 per month. For some, this extra income can help offset rising expenses, but it's important to understand that this increase is much smaller compared to recent years. In 2022, Social Security recipients received a substantial 5.9% increase, followed by an even larger 8.7% increase in 2023. Even in 2024, there was a more generous 3.2% raise. But in 2025, the 2.5% boost is the smallest since 2021. And it raises questions about whether the government's adjustments are keeping pace with the real cost of living. The 2.5% adjustment may seem modest, but it's essential to view it in the context of ongoing inflation. While $50 a month can help, it doesn't necessarily reflect the increasing costs of everyday items like food, housing, and healthcare. Social Security adjustments are supposed to keep beneficiaries' purchasing power intact, but this smaller increase doesn't seem to be enough, especially when considering how inflation has been impacting retirees and those on fixed incomes. For many, a $50 bump may barely cover the rising costs of basic goods, let alone medical expenses, which continue to climb year after year. To understand why this 2.5% increase feels underwhelming, it's important to look at the calculation method behind these adjustments. The government uses a formula based on the Consumer Price Index for urban wage earners and clerical workers, CPIW, to determine the cost of living adjustments. While this index tracks inflation, it doesn't necessarily reflect the spending patterns of older adults, who tend to spend more on healthcare and other specific needs. As a result, the increase may not fully account for the higher costs that Social Security recipients face. This 2.5% increase may also be seen in a broader historical context. Over the past few decades, COLA adjustments have varied significantly. In the 1990s and early 2000s, the increases often outpaced inflation, offering real relief to beneficiaries. But as we moved into the 2010s and 2020s, the pattern shifted. Many years saw COLA increases that were below inflation rates, meaning recipients were effectively losing ground, not gaining. This trend only worsened with the more recent years where inflation soared, yet the adjustments lagged behind, leaving many struggling to make ends meet. The 2025 adjustment may seem like a small relief, but it's hardly enough to make up for the compounded losses from previous years. The government's methodology for calculating cost of living adjustments, COLA, is based on the Consumer Price Index for urban wage earners and clerical workers, CPIW, which tracks the price of goods and services that wage earners typically purchase. While this index might seem like a reasonable way to measure inflation, it doesn't accurately reflect the spending habits of Social Security recipients. For instance, older adults tend to spend a significantly larger portion of their income on healthcare, which has been rising at a much faster rate than general inflation. Yet, CPIW doesn't give enough weight to medical expenses, meaning that the COLA adjustments based on this index don't fully address the true cost of living for Social Security recipients. This misalignment makes it increasingly difficult for beneficiaries to keep up with rising expenses. A critical issue is the way the COLA calculations are tied to inflation data from only the third quarter of the year. The government looks at inflation rates during that period to determine the adjustment for the following year, ignoring the higher inflation levels that occurred in the first half of the year. This creates a significant gap between actual inflation and the adjustment Social Security recipients receive. In 2025, for example, inflation in the early part of the year was much higher than what was recorded in the third quarter, but that data isn't factored into the COLA increase. The result is an adjustment that doesn't reflect the real-world financial strain many recipients are experiencing, especially as they face rising costs throughout the entire year, not just during the third quarter. Further complicating this issue is the growing discrepancy between COLA increases and the actual inflation rate over the past few decades. If we look back to the 1990s and early 2000s, cost of living adjustments often kept up with, or even outpaced inflation. During those years, Social Security recipients generally saw their benefits grow in a way that matched or exceeded the increase in their living costs. However, starting in the 2010s, COLA increases began to fall short. In many years, the adjustments were smaller than the rate of inflation, meaning that recipients saw their purchasing power diminish, even as their costs were rising. In the 2020s, this trend has only gotten worse. For example, in 2022 and 2023, COLA adjustments were higher, but inflation was so high that even these increases weren't enough to offset the financial pressure on Social Security recipients. The 2.5% COLA in 2025 is just the latest example of how the current system is failing to keep up with the reality of rising prices. One of the most significant issues with the current calculation process is that it fails to capture the full scope of inflation that Social Security recipients are dealing with. By using the CPIW, which focuses on a broader group of workers rather than seniors, the government misses the specific financial pressures faced by older adults. The rising costs of healthcare, prescription drugs, and other age-related expenses are not adequately reflected in the calculations, which is why the 2.5% increase feels insufficient. It's not just about what people spend on groceries or gas. It's about the expenses that many retirees face that don't get the attention they deserve in these calculations. The issue with Social Security's COLA calculation isn't just a technicality. It's also deeply rooted in political challenges. Both Republicans and Democrats agree that the current method for calculating COLA is flawed. Yet despite this shared acknowledgement, both parties have failed to pass meaningful legislation to correct the problem. The issue isn't that they don't recognize the need for change. Rather, it's that political gridlock prevents any action from being taken. Each party has their own set of priorities, and instead of focusing solely on fixing the COLA formula, they often attach other unrelated provisions to Social Security bills. These extra provisions create disagreements between the two parties, which results in the failure to reach a consensus and ultimately block any progress. A key reason for this political stalemate is that Social Security is an enormous program, with tens of millions of beneficiaries relying on it. The decisions made about its future carry significant financial implications, not just for retirees, but for the broader economy as well. Addressing the issue of COLA and ensuring that benefits accurately reflect inflation could mean more spending, which would require additional funding for the program. Politicians, especially those wary of increasing government spending, are reluctant to make these changes because they fear the impact on the federal budget. Even though there is bipartisan recognition of the problem, the complexity and cost of addressing it head-on makes it a highly contentious issue that gets lost in broader political debates. Adding to the urgency is the looming insolvency of the Social Security Trust Fund, which is projected to run out of money by 2033. According to the Social Security Administration's own reports, if no changes are made, beneficiaries will face a 21% cut in their benefits by that year. This looming insolvency should be a wake-up call for policymakers, urging them to take swift action to secure the future of Social Security. However, the reality is that the issue of insolvency is often overshadowed by partisan disagreements. While both parties acknowledge the gravity of the situation, they've been unable to agree on the best solution. As a result, Social Security recipients continue to be caught in the crossfire of political inaction. The lack of meaningful reform also raises questions about why nothing is being done to correct the COLA calculations. One theory is that lawmakers are reluctant to make changes because doing so might hasten the insolvency date of the program. If beneficiaries were paid more, through more accurate COLA adjustments, it would increase the overall cost of the program, bringing the system closer to insolvency faster. In a sense, the political inaction could be seen as a way to delay the inevitable. Instead of addressing the issue directly, lawmakers may prefer to maintain the status quo to avoid the immediate financial strain that would come with more generous adjustments.